3.5 miles outside the town called New Shellen, at the bottom of a particularly steep and rocky hillside, is a little nun cemetery known as Fall Court, called Unseelie by some. This little graveyard has been spoken about for generations as a haunted and abnormal place. In the centre of the old worn tombstones, which date back centuries, is a great and ancient maple tree, which is known to turn bright violet in the autumn of every 7 years. This tree, which is known as the fairy tree by the locals of the area, looms over a particular tombstone, also known for its strange tendency to seemingly glow a pale white on the nights of the solstice and the equinox. It is reported that should an individual be in the vicinity of the cemetery on those nights while the fairy tree turns violet, one may see the presence of the fae folk in the form of bright glowing orbs rising from the glowing grave, which acts as a door between their world and ours. The grave itself is said to be that of Dolores O'Run, who was claimedly elf-shot at as a young maiden and taken to the other world. So great was her beauty that she was taken to dwell amongst them and dance for long decades. She was found after being missing for several years. Not old, but still a lovely young woman, wandering the countryside, silent and mad, until she passed some short time later. It is said that it was the first year she was buried when the tree turned purple, and the legend says that should you check her grave, you will find it to be empty, for the fae have again reclaimed her for themselves. It was early October when my editor approached me and asked if I would travel to New Shellen to write a story for the paper about the cemetery and take photographs of the legendary fairy tree in the glowing grave. He had received word from sources in the area that the tree had indeed turned violet, and he felt that it would make an excellent piece for the Sunday column, and he asked if I would like to write it. I agreed reluctantly, as I was becoming concerned that I was indeed becoming the weird story guy after the relative success I'd had with a UFO story last year. Since then, I had chased giant black dogs across the moor, spent nights on a lake looking for a serpent, and photographed ghosts in an abandoned estate house. However, despite longing to be taken seriously as a real reporter, I could not afford to turn down a paying job and the chance to see my words in print. So, loading my van, I set off from the city to find the elusive New Shellen and its fae-inhabited cemetery. Finding the town proved to be a bit more difficult than I had originally anticipated. What was alleged to be a road on the map proved only a gravelly dirt path, and the town itself a series of farmhouses and barns situated loosely around a granary and a gas station diner, which somehow seemed to be associated as a joint business. I found myself seated at a rough wooden table in the early afternoon, gratefully eating soup and a mutton sandwich served by a kind older woman who seemed to be waitressing and running the counter simultaneously, while a gentleman old enough to have founded the establishment, with giant glasses, squinted nose close to the order slips, cooking busily in the back. I was far from alone, as numerous locals trudged in from the fields to refuel before several more hours of harvest work. I surveyed the crowd until I settled on a lively group behind me. I turned in my chair and introduced myself graciously. I was met with looks of amused suspicion as I held up my camera as proof of authenticity. All was well until I uttered the words Autumn Court, at which point a heavy and profound silence fell, not just at that table, but the entire room. I had quite by accident become the complete and total centre of attention. You've got no good reason to be traipsing around at Unseelie, the waitress said, appearing from nowhere, despite me not having directed any conversation her direction. You city folk think it's a fool game, but there's forces there that best not be tampered with, the man who I'd originally addressed burst forth. I had begun to awkwardly defend myself when an older gentleman with a thick white beard and savage expression interrupted. No! Let him go! Let him go! He was smiling, a gnarly, vindictive grin, as his pipe rocked up and down in his clenched teeth. His words carried on clouds of sweet cherry Cavendish smoke. He wants a picture of the fairy tree, then let him get it. He laughed devilishly, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The woman gave him a look of sheer shameful disapproval, but he just cackled out a series of directions, as if barely able to resist exploding in uproarious hilarity. At this point, a great murmured discussion was mounting in the room, at which time I finished my coffee and left a tip beneath the cup before trying to hastily and quietly sneak out the front door. I had almost made it when a sudden grip of a small, strong hand clamped down on my arm like a vice, and I whirled around to see the waitress facing me with a dread and serious expression. Now, sir, don't you go and stir them up, whether you believe in such or not. It's only pure folly to go to that place. And it's no spectacle for amusements. Even if you put a picture in the paper, it would only encourage others and fuel the fire. It would be purely unchristian of me if I were not to express the absolute danger you might be putting yourself in. I clasped her hand gently and carefully pushed it back with as kind a smile as I could manage. Ma'am, it is truly okay. I will be as careful as a living being can be. And looking in her eyes, I thought she might weep in concern for me. I left the establishment in a daze of disbelief. Even after having pursued strangeness for over a year, not yet I encountered people so enwrapped in a mythology as of this town. The creeping power of suggestion was taking hold, but I aggressively refused it, with a mockery as I started the engine and drove for the cemetery. There was a tall iron gate at the top of a craggy hill by a forest. It had no words, only strange runes in a row across the top, which I could not decipher. Gathering my bag and camera from the van, I approached and found myself standing at the beginning of a long, winding stone walk, which proceeded down the hillside and into a group of trees. I began my sojourn just as the sun was beginning its descent behind the hill. The path seemed never-ending and steep, but as I neared the bottom, my eyes locked on a looming dark shape below. A statue of a tall, robed and hooded figure. Presumably, death stood on a pedestal as the first visible grave. I snapped pictures of this unexpected, fascinating piece of atmosphere rising from the tall, pale grass, and then I saw it rising over the tombstones in untended bushes, standing fiery and magnificent in the red twilight, a stupendous maple tree whose foliage, down to every single leaf, was a vibrant, real violet. I gazed in abject wonder before rushing to hurriedly find a position to begin taking shots while retaining the amazing effect that dusk was having on the lighting. It was then, as I gazed through the shutter, that I noticed a small, ancient tombstone which stood almost in the shade of the boughs of the tree. And I could swear that as the night grew darker and darker, that I could see the faint outline of a glow beginning around its edges. I stopped taking pictures and lowered the camera so that I could see with my naked eyes that worn grey rectangle was indeed luminescent. Its own very peculiar, strange, unlike anything that I'd ever seen. My mind was racing as I tried to account for the phenomenon with some rational, completely natural cause. However, even as I struggled for logic, I had begun to notice faint, flickering pale blue far behind the stone. I stumbled backwards as I saw still more and more of the growing presence of spheres appearing to almost emerge from the ground. And as I saw them, I had completely forgotten to continue photographing the wonders I was witnessing. Now standing in almost complete darkness, with the stars visible and shining above, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the corner of my eye. I began to fumble in my bag for a flashlight, and that was when I heard a distinctly female voice from the shadows. "They say that there is no one in that grave," she said, just as I found it and pushed down the button. My mind said calmly, "One of the locals has come to check on you." But as the beam of light fell on a beautiful young woman in a blue frilled dress of a type from close to a century old, she goes, "Would you like to find out?" she asked, her eyes strange and shining. And as she spoke, the light went out. All light was extinguished. All vision humbled by shadow, and for a moment I thought I would scream. Then the light of the flashlight returned, but now I was again alone. Now laying inside the closed walls of a coffin. You can imagine the sheer terror and panic I felt as every rational thought argued against this reality. And such as I was, I began screaming and pounding at the roof of my prison. And as I lay here in the darkness, I find my recorder in my coat pocket, which I have taken out and used to document the events of the past few days. And as I lay here, using what last bit of air I have to create these words for you to hear, there is a sound. A distant scratching sound. The sound of earth moving. And at first, my heart jumps. Someone has come to save me. This has all been a joke. The locals having their fun with a stranger. And now they're going to dig me up and take me out and let me go. But as I listen, I realize that the scratching sound, the digging sound, is coming from underneath me.